That's let me fix that. You're gonna need to do that again. I had to turn off my other monitor. I have multiple monitors going on here.
That's okay. I fully understand that.
There we go. That should look better. So yeah, great to be here today. And as I said, I actually started my career in Georgia in Atlanta Internet Security Systems. They were acquired in, I started in '99 and they were acquired in 2007 by IBM, and IBM Managed Security Services, and their security division today is actually the culmination of that internet security systems they acquired. So IBM security is actually in Atlanta and it's in Georgia, and there's a huge hub there for it. It's really interesting. And so a lot of my career started around doing intrusion detection, security operations, things like that. And with Vectra today, we are a data science company focused on network and cloud detection and monitoring. And we spend a lot of time looking at using data science to understand the kind of things that occur within networks. And that's where I'm at today. And that's what I really want to talk about. It's so 2020, to say it's an interesting year is an understatement, right? Like this has been an incredibly interesting and different year. And like the 20 years I've been dealing with security, this one definitely stands out, and I look forward to 2021 and this is done. As a network detection response company, we've always focused on this concept of the attack surface being internal networks and companies, and that systems are connected and users, and that's pretty normal. That's how companies are. People go to work on a normal day. They have their laptop or desktop, they have servers, they're connecting. There was cloud, but by and large, communication and things like that was occurring within these systems, and they were present, and that's how security's operated for its history. Well, 2020 has accelerated the work from home thing. It's already existed, but it's at a scale we've never seen before. And we don't think it's going back. At least here in the Bay Area, you have companies like Facebook, Twitter, Google, everybody has already told their employees, you know what, and Microsoft as well, you never have to come back to work. My company, Vectra, has actually told me that too. So ironically, they've moved me to California and now they've told me I don't have to go to work anymore. So it's like, all right, well, I'm here anyway. What that means is that there's no longer a network to log into, and the way people communicate has completely shifted. And the winner of 2020 in that term is Microsoft with Microsoft Office 365. It's a startling stat for them alone. So if you think about it, Microsoft Office used to be an application that was installed locally, and email was an application that ran on a local server inside a network, and that's what we looked for. Well, they, I guess it's been about 5 years now, they released Office, and you can see the numbers early on. They had regular active users, but this year, as of March, and I've heard the numbers are hitting near 300 now, but as of March and April of 2020, as COVID hit, Microsoft was peaking at about 258 million daily active users every single month. That's almost 300 million people a day log into Microsoft Office. That's a huge chunk. And by next year, that'll be 400 million. Like this number keeps growing for them. Their earnings are up. They keep bringing this up. Teams itself, Microsoft Teams, now is hitting close to 100 million active users every day communicating and chatting on it. That in itself is like a huge shift in how we communicate, where data is put, and what goes on. And the point of that is that if Office 365 is widely used, then attackers like to go wherever the attack landscape is or the attack surface. And in this new environment where we work from home and we don't connect to computers, quite simply, Microsoft Office 365 has now become the #1 target of attacks, and it's the most prime attack surface today. And 2020 made that happen, but I don't think that's going to change ever. I think it's just going to stay that way. And we start to think about what's really in Office 365 and why is it so valuable? And it's everything. It's not just your email, but mainly it's OneDrive. OneDrive, which is SharePoint in companies, has become the file systems of enterprise America. Uh, Vectra, personally, where I work, we're a huge Office 365 company. We use it religiously, actually, and all our data is in our OneDrive. I have 2 OneDrives myself with 2 TB of data, one for work, one for personal. Anything and everything I've ever had is in there. I actually have a home RAID I used to use. I barely plug that in now. Every now and then I try to archive, but for the most part, my whole existence, both with work and personal, is in OneDrive. And that's what we're seeing with companies, and that's how things are connected. And that's because they brought in every application, PowerPoint. This PowerPoint I'm showing now, this is actually in OneDrive. Word, Excel, Notes, Teams, everything. Microsoft, when they brought all their apps online, they created into this huge ecosystem of connectivity so that every single application is connected, and the way you share with apps and communicate is all within this single Office 365 environment, which means for companies, anything they have of value, IP, trade secrets, financial, customer data, it's all in Microsoft Office 365 today. And that's true for Vectra, and that's true for almost every company that we talk to and look at. Microsoft has such a dominance in the cloud with Office 365. That's where people live. The consequence being, of course, theft of data, ransomware is even starting to move into it. It's become a way to spread and propagate in networks where you have no endpoints. So think about this, like lateral movement in particular is something that we think about. It used to be that when you're on a host and you got malware, you would install a package and do a scan and look for other endpoints and then propagate to those when you saw they were exposed. Sitting at home, you don't actually have a way to go from machine to machine anymore the way you did sitting inside a network when you're person to person. So those methods of propagation effectively in 2020 no longer work. Where it was the #1 thing to do, you can't do that anymore. So they had to rethink it. So how big the problem is, now these numbers are from last year before 2020. And at that point, it was already becoming an issue where 40% of organizations have witnessed an Office 365 account takeover. And I should clarify what is an account takeover, because that's what we're talking about here. So we always hear about phishing. Phishing is the method of infection of getting onto a device, or it's getting somebody to click on something and install or whatever, or to steal a password or content, whatever they want to do with it. Account takeover is the concept of stealing a person's user identity and then being able to use that identity to impersonate the person to access any resources they had or anything they had connections to. So account takeover can occur within any software as a service application or anywhere else. The idea is I'm you, and now I'm going to be you and do whatever I need to. Office 365 has had a lot of account takeover coming on, because once you become the user, you now start to think about what things can I do with it. And it's the growing problem. So the answer usually is, if I tell you account takeovers, I'm going to take your identity from phishing, et cetera, the usual answer you get from the market is use multi-factor authentication. So that's true. I can say this. Multi-factor authentication is absolutely the #1 thing that everybody should do. When they talk about going back to the basics, it is multi-factor authentication. Up front, personally, I don't believe any complexity to password actually matters and works. And most complex passwords are just designed to infuriate people and to make it hard to remember things. They don't actually work. I mean, technically, the only thing that works mathematically is the actual length. And then you can figure out how long does it take to crunch that data and how long would it take to crack the password. There's no such thing as uncrackable. It's simply like, how long does it take? Does it take 10 seconds, or does it take 10 minutes or 10 days? The most complicated things are the longest things. So really, for a password, the best passwords are actually phrases like "my dog is brown and lazy." Like, that's actually more valuable than uppercase, lowercase, all the characters. That was a funny thing they did. Saying that, all passwords are still useless. Multi-factor makes it a lot better. You should absolutely use it anywhere and everywhere you can. However, we also have to accept, while it's good and the #1 thing you can do, it's also not 100%. like any prevention or access control. And there are three particular ways people are getting around multi-factor within specifically Office 365. So the first one is kind of an interesting problem, and it's the legacy protocol issue. It turns out that Microsoft built multi-factor authentication to work on the normal ways you log into Office, but they don't support multi-factor authentication on the old email techniques like IMAP, SMTP, POP3. And those services are not always turned off by default by people. In fact, they're left on by default by Microsoft because of support of old applications, things that people are doing. It's up to the company to actually turn off those protocols, but you have administrators who don't realize that they need to turn those off. So even though people are implementing multi-factor authentication, you can actually take a bad password and a legacy protocol and just get in and bypass the multi-factor anyway. So step one is, after doing multi-factor, yes, the next step is companies need to turn off legacy protocols unless they have a very specific reason to use it, then map it to an app, then no. The second, malicious Azure apps. This works exactly like iOS or Android. So what I mean by that, on the mobile space, what we discovered for malware in the mobile space is that attackers will lure you with a malicious app in a bad app store or somewhere else. And that's why they always tell you not to sideload or be careful what you put. And when you install the app, it gets the same permissions as the user who installed it. Well, Microsoft adopted the same app concept in Azure, which is where Office 365 is. And you can install Azure apps based on a phishing email or things like that. And when that app is installed, again, even with multi-factor, it generates a token on the device as well. So you get this persistence of connection. And when you install the app, you effectively, and you say, yes, allow these permissions, you just gave that malicious app the same permissions that you already have. And you said it's okay, and the token of the multi-factor allows it. And if somebody has a back into that app, they're now using that malicious app to create access and bypass multi-factor. And then the last, actually, the stay signed in. That's the, that goes back to the token thing too. So this is the convenience factor, right? So even at Vector, I can tell you now, we do a 30-day stay signed in. It's pretty normal because people don't want to have to, imagine every time you log in and out of email or of an app, and imagine that every time you logged in or out, you had to re-authenticate and do your multi-factor. There actually is a cost of time. If every employee within a company was constantly having to log in and out multiple times a day and constantly doing multi-factor. Yes, it's the most secure thing. It's the best way to do it, but no, it's not realistic because no one's going to go through that. It's very painful. So they generate these keys and tokens that are persistent for a certain amount of time and don't require authentication. And it's designed to minimize all those logins. Well, the thing is that when an attacker gets to an already authorized system or they get access to that token, that means they can use that to get authentication into wherever they need to for whatever that set amount of period is. So now you have an immediate window of access that they can work on getting more permanent access. So these three things in particular for Office 365 are something that Microsoft's struggling with multi-factor authentication. So again, yes, use multi-factor, but no, it's not 100%. And we always have to be aware of that. To give you an example, what an actual bypass attack looks like, things we've actually seen, I'm going to touch on some actual cloud attacks on it. One of the interesting things about the token, I was talking about the persistence. Now, couple that with the home network. So think about your home network, and so enterprises spend a ton of money on firewalls, access controls, switches, routers, everything's configured. Now we're all at home immediately. No one was ready for that. I can tell you now, nobody was ready for that I talk about. And we're now all using, every employee is using whatever home configuration they have. So maybe somebody has an out-of-date Linksys with no patches. They also have their Roku on the network. They have students, they have their kids doing stay-at-home school while doing work. They don't know how to configure that. They're not even thinking about that. It's incredibly exposed. So an attack vector is, okay, so I get on the home network and I'm easily able to compromise an endpoint, i.e. a laptop or whatever it is, right there on the spot. Well, because that device has these tokens and these sessions already on it, you can actually steal that session and just get access to that. Instead of even a password, you're like, I just need to take the tokens in that session, then get off that local network and now log into the Office 365 authentication with the token in session to replicate what's being done at home with an approved token, and now actually get onto email and everything else. And then as they sit there inside the network, they can start doing recon and get on public shares and actually load payloads into different places, and then create new privileged groups and accounts, and ultimately get access to the environment before the token expires so that they're actually in there, which means now you're going out, dig around for data, and ultimately with the outcome being that you want to exfiltrate that data and send it to somewhere else. All this without touching a password or knowing a password. So let's talk about some of the tactics and things that are happening. The first ones are kind of, well, I call it the obvious. Maybe, I don't know if it is obvious or not. I guess it is to me because these are the kind of regular things that are known. The most obvious being that once somebody's on a, inside an Office 365 environment with an account, the first thing you're going to do is search and look for things, right? You're going to start looking in Teams and emails, files for passwords, financial data. By the way, OneNote is one of the most popular password tools on the market. It wasn't supposed to be, but people are like, oh, well, Microsoft's encrypted and there's OneNote. I've seen this. So people store, a ton of passwords in OneNote. Once you're in Office 365, you can start searching OneNote for passwords. Or maybe there's access codes in email, or there's access codes in Teams, wherever. You can start to find this kind of stuff and things are put in there. Email forwarding has become a pretty common thing where once you're in there, you can forward specific emails based on instances to any destination you want. Fraud being internal phishing. So you think of external phishing, which it's already hard enough to catch somebody duplicating an external email for phishing. It's even harder when it's a legitimate email coming from a legitimate user to other internal users to get them to do things. Then there's watering hole attacks, which is you're putting common shared files in OneDrive or SharePoint that are used by lots of people. You can actually modify those files to be malicious, so everybody starts installing malware locally on their systems just by access to those. Ransomware, which has been rampant this year, you can crypt OneDrive. And then lastly, the exfiltration, which is unexpected. Those are the basic stuff. There's a few more techniques that are a little more advanced and interesting that we've seen in particular in the last 2 years. So the first one, and I think I've alluded to a little bit, is that cloud attacks don't happen in silos. It's really actually mapped to the example, but this is the other direction. And the concept is that I give an example of logging into a local endpoint to get cloud credentials from that endpoint. Well, how about the other way around, where they log into the Office 365 environment first, so that they can get to the endpoint and then progress an attack on the local endpoint. Now, candidly, this attack worked better in 2019 when they could get on an endpoint and then start to move around the network. And we saw this specifically happening with an attack, APT-33, an attack group out of Iran known as Homium. This is what they've been doing for the last few years. Iran has been particularly focused on stealing intellectual property, trade secrets. They're a little late to the cyber warfare game compared to people like Russia, the US, Israel, China, UK. Those are all the countries that are like really ahead. Iran entered it more in when Israel and US frankly attacked them, and they were a victim and they realized, oh, this is powerful. So they jumped in. So they're spending a lot of time trying to still learn from education. They're getting to higher research. They're learning from companies about how things work. They're really in a learning phase, but they've learned in the last 10 years really quickly, and they've gotten really good very quick. So they would jump in. So the first thing they would do is a password spray. This is actually really basic stuff, which is they're just going in there and doing really, and I bring up their maturity because they're still doing more basic stuff than the Russians or the US or things like that. And they're just password spraying and looking for credentials they can get on, and they're being a little bit opportunistic about it. They're not as targeted, they're more opportunistic. When they get those credentials, this is where it got interesting. They do a really interesting thing where they set up rules in 365 to trigger code execution on the endpoint where the Outlook client exists. And they would install this reverse shell called Powertron. And they would do that from an email rule that told the email to go install a file on the local system. And it's interesting they could do that. So they would get a weak password for Outlook, and they didn't care who it was. They would just go find it. And they're doing password sprays of AD. They would take those passwords, put it on the system, and this was automated, and go, now install a remote shell. And then once they were on that, that's how they were starting to move inside organizations. They would then, from that endpoint that they installed that, start to scan for other systems, scan for servers, move laterally, ultimately to get domain administrative. Again, this was great in 2019. It's a little bit weaker now, but it still happens. The one that's become more powerful this year is this whole installing malicious Azure apps. So just like Android, it's like legitimate sign-in portals, and the goal is to get you to install an app, and you can see here from the permissions that the app has a list of things it wants to do. I like this one, like maintain access to data you have given access to, read your contacts, sign in, read your profile, read your mail. Like these apps, just a list. And most people, they just read through, go yes, 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 accept. And the last one's great, have full access to all files you have access to. Like that's actually what it says in the permissions. You're basically saying, yeah, sure, go for it. And they get persistent access to whatever you allow for 90 days, and resetting the password doesn't work. You actually have to get rid of the app, because as long as the app's there, you've already given it permissions and you keep giving it to it, and it's giving tokens. So this happened, and it's been happening in 2019 into 2020 in Australia. And this is from, well, they say widely attributed to China. It's pretty well known. This is coming from China. This is really interesting. So there's an app called MailGuard 365. This is a security app for Office, for mail. It's one that's already used within the Australian government widely. They adopted this app. Somebody made some big decision at a government level and said, we're all going to use MailGuard 365. There's nothing wrong with MailGuard 365. It's just what they use. Well, the attackers figured that out, and they just built a fake malicious OAuth app, and they send it to users to make it look real. So this comes from a phishing email or a spoof. You go in there and tell somebody, go, oh, you need to install this, but it all looks legit to them. So somebody, it only takes one person within the organization has to install it, and they did. And it gave them these permissions, offline access, for an extended time, user read, and mail rewrite, the ability to read user mail, move, delete messages. This was really going on for a while, and this really happened, and it took them a while to figure this out, that the Chinese infiltrated the Australian government through their MailGuard security app for Office 365. And they propagated quite well, so that happens. The last couple of things I want to talk about that are kind of different are the built-in tools within Microsoft Office 365. They're incredibly powerful and they have legitimate use, but attackers have figured out that they're useful for them too. The first one is something called e-discovery compliance. This is an interesting tool. So they built it for compliance reasons. Now, with companies' compliances, let's say they got to deal with one of the new privacy laws, like California has one now, or GDPR in Europe. There will be others in other states very quickly. And they're like, you can't have personal information of people stored in places, or you need to know where it's at. And since so much information is in Microsoft Office across all the applications, the compliance teams need a way to search for things. So Microsoft built a search engine. It's like a Google engine for all of Microsoft Office. It's really slick. You can search for anything. Now, not every user has access to this e-discovery compliance tool. It was intended for an administrative user, somebody who's approved to search. But the fact is, it's an entire search language that lets you search every application in Office and quickly search. So that whole password thing or that credit card thing, if somebody gets access to this tool, they're able to just quickly say, just go find me everything that looks like a password, or look for the word password, or hone in on a credit card structure, or you can just give it very specific things and go, just go search everything. So it's not like anybody has to bounce across all the little applications in Office 365. You can just use one universal search language if you get access to this and just go find everything. So great for compliance, but also great for enumeration, great for discovery, recon, and great for leading to exfiltration. It's not an exfiltration tool, but it'll tell you where things are and what to take. The other one is something called Power Automate. Now, PowerShell has been known for a long time to be the #1 attacker tool when on a Windows device. And PowerShell also is probably one of my favorite tools on my own Windows laptop. You can do so much with it. It's great. You can really control the system. Power Automate, it used to be called Microsoft Flow. They changed it this year to Power Automate as its name, but it's effectively the equivalent of PowerShell for Microsoft Office. If anybody's familiar with if this then that, if I can say it, IFTT, right? Like that's what it is. Yeah, but to a whole nother level, you can script is what it is. Power Automate allows you to run all kinds of actions. And there's even pre-built ones. And you can see where it says choose your flows trigger. It used to be called flow. That's why it's still there. And it says when an item is created, SharePoint, when an item is created or modified, then you tell it what to do. So there's a lot of if, then that. When a file is created in OneDrive, you can say, then send it in an email as an attachment to this other address. You can actually get very specific and not actually have to be persistent, and it creates it. When something happens, reach out to this person. Like there's just a list of what you can do with it. I like that post emails with specific keywords to Twitter, for example. You can say if an email is sent with any kind of financial, then post it to Twitter. Like you can actually tell it to do that and just automate it constantly. So Microsoft themselves, this is what's interesting. Microsoft themselves is aware of the problem, and they're the ones who really had an aha moment. This is from March 2020. Microsoft went in and did some research, as they always do. They're really good at it. And their response team, their incident response team, their CERT team, found 6 advanced threat actors in network of large multinational. They will not say who it is for obvious reasons. Like they don't want to implicate that, but it's one of their customers. And it's really interesting. You could go read the research report. It's really interesting to go look at all the details. I've just taken a snippet out of it. And again, this is from March this year. They really showed the use of both e-discovery and Power Automate as tools within this attack. And by the way, the other thing is that they said it persisted for 213 days till Microsoft figured out that was in there. So this is like for a year, imagine using automated tools. When they say including e-discovery compliance search feature and Microsoft Flow, again, they just renamed Microsoft Flow to Power Automate. So every time you see Microsoft Flow, it's Power Automate. They did a rebranding this year. I don't know why. But e-discovery was used to discover passwords, to search for IP and segments, to constantly look for things. And Power Automate was used to automate the exfil of data whenever it was discovered. And so that data was just going out for 213 days. What is that? That's 9 months, 10 months, like longer. Yeah, about 10 months. For 10 months, they sat in the Office 365 environment, just continually gathering information and then sending it out to a remote site. So here's what's surprising, by the way. Here's the thing. You would think that Microsoft, knowing that these tools are a problem, would have a way to trigger and detect on the misuse of them. That'd almost be kind of obvious, to be honest. But they don't. They actually don't. They do have logs and audit, and they have a lot of data that tells you when things are used and where it's at, but it's a huge mountain of data to sift through, and they have no obvious way to look for that. Microsoft, most of their security tools primarily focus on malware, threat actors, things like that, but they're not really paying attention to the internal tools and the usage and trying to differentiate between good and bad usage natively. So that's just where it's at. Which leads to the point, and now let's talk about kind of the how, right? It's a simple question we ask people, like, so if you had a compromised Office 365 account right now, would you know? The answer to most people is actually no. It's really hard to figure out. Again, 213 days for one Microsoft found, that's the one they found. We've seen plenty more that last longer. So to flip this question, and less of would you know, it's more like how would you know? What's the right way to figure out that somebody's pivoting to your account or installed a malicious app or using Power Automate or doing all these things that are approved but in a malicious manner? So the answer comes to behaviors? The short answer is using tools, tactics, and procedures and methods of detection around that, rather than static methods of hashes, IPs, domains, or network artifacts, which no longer have value in the cloud. And I should point that out too. Like, I don't know if it's obvious or not, but one of the issues with Office 365 and all software as a service in general is there's no longer a network or an endpoint to extract data from. The only thing that exists in the cloud, in software as a service in Office, is identity in the user and the behaviors that the user does. So we no longer have things like, oh, he was going to this domain, or, oh, this IP was involved. IP doesn't tell us anything anymore. I have, and I'm looking around, I have 6 devices on my desk right now that all log into my Office 365 at various states. Maybe that's too many computers for one person, but I bet everybody's about the same. I have 2 phones, 2 tablets, and a laptop, 2 laptops. I don't know why. I do. They all can access my Office 365 environment. So trying to figure out the device doesn't work. I'm always traveling around moving, or IP address coming from everywhere. So that doesn't work either. So the threat coverage from using that kind of stuff, while historically they've been very easy to do and fast, and they're still used today. A lot of security tools are still saying, oh, this is a malicious actor. Threat intel stuff tells you, oh, they're coming from this area. Like, that's good in a moment of time, but it's not durable, and it loses value. It loses value in regular network and endpoint. It's especially a problem in the cloud when you only have identity. So the industry and what we've looked at is the concept is you now have to think about tools, tactics, and procedures. And when I use the words tool, tactics, procedure, method, what you should start thinking about is the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So MITRE is an organization, has sat down with a lot of other organizations and bodies and sat down and came up with this concept of the attack matrix. They built it for all devices and networks, but they've now built one specifically for Office 365 because Office 365 is such a problem on its own that it needed its own MITRE ATT&CK matrix. I encourage you to go look at their website if you haven't already at attack.mitre.org. You can go in there and they show you all the different things. But what's happened is by collaboration with vendors, like including Vectra, lots of others, independent bodies, other people, everyone's finally working together and started contributing to a common body of knowledge of building out and mapping the tools, tactics, and procedures used by various organizations across the attack lifecycle. And this is great, by the way, because the total number of tools, tactics, and procedures across not just Office 365, but all of them, doesn't number more than, surprisingly, about 300. That's an incredibly small number in the large picture. And all those procedures and those behaviors, they're all behaviors. All those behaviors are mapped across the attack lifecycle so that you can start to understand the kind of behaviors that occur in an attack at every phase of it. And what we've learned, and the industry has learned, is that these behaviors are durable and you can't get around it. Like, in order to discover that other accounts or other systems or data, you have to do reconnaissance. And doing reconnaissance has a very specific list of things you can do. So regardless of the tool or how they did it or what they're doing, the fact is the behavior has to occur, which makes it incredibly durable. And it allows you to start to understand what an attack looks like. And it allows you to start to see a sequence of behaviors to create kind of a certainty, so to speak, around what a threat is. And that's a lot easier to grasp. For example, saying, I see that Power Automate is being used from a user that's never used it before, and he's coming from a country that doesn't normally access my email. Like, that's a behavior. And that's a profile that an attacker cannot get away from. They cannot evade. It doesn't matter if they encrypt or whatever they do, the behavior has to occur. So it makes a really good thing to look at. Now, putting that into a more readable list, what you end up with is it starts to look like this within Office 365, that it goes in this order. They first got to get access, then persistence, then privilege escalation. You'll see defense evasion, discovery, lateral movement, collection, exfiltration. It goes down, yada, yada, yada. Impact is about the encryption thing. No one really knew where to put that. They're not stealing data, but they're disrupting you. So under persistence, you'll see things like creating power automate flows, adding new accounts, installing malicious applications. Like the beauty is behaviors actually read in a language that everybody understands. Privilege escalation, adding users to groups. Like there's pretty simple things. How they do it might change, but these are things they have to do. So it makes it good to look for. So Vectra, one of the things we did is we used data science and machine learning to look for these things. And within 2020, we've deployed widely to a lot of accounts that as of this summer, we had visibility into, now there's over 300 million Microsoft accounts, but we had visibility, or let me rephrase that. I had a sampling of about 4 million accounts that I was able to take data from. So part of my job, my title is head of security analytics, and I run our advisory services. I spend time with data science, and I spend time with our data doing analytics, I guess. It's kind of like threat hunting at scale and trying to understand trends within industries, the kind of behaviors that occur, like what's really happening out there. And this is what we learned this summer. From June to August 2020, we realized with the work from home, we wanted to ask the question like, wow, now that work from home is a thing, it's been long enough as of this summer, like, so what's been happening out there? What kind of suspicious behaviors have been occurring in Office 365 within the sampling that I looked at of accounts? And by suspicious, I mean, so to be more specific, suspicious means that it was clearly not normal. So for example, suspicious sign-on activity, it's not, did sign-on activity happen? Was it sign-on activity from a device that we never saw before, or from a location we never saw before, even though it was a user that normally logs on? You get into like, what makes it suspicious are those kind of things. Like it's abnormal, or it's different than the rest. It's never been seen before, and it wasn't normal within this account. We learned that within all the organizations we looked at, 96% of them exhibited some form of suspicious lateral movement. The colors do match here, by the way. So lateral movement being things like suspicious Azure AD operations, suspicious Power Automate, redundant access creation. Like these kind of things are happening in every organization. That's almost all of them, it occurs. Now, that doesn't mean an attack happened in all of them. It simply means those kind of behaviors do occur. And that's really important from an attack surface, because that is an indication of how an attack would succeed. I.e., if you already have suspicious Power Automate flow creation going on, when an attacker gets in, they're going to get away with the same thing because it's allowed and they can pull that action. So that means that the fact that Power Automate is being used in crazy ways, or it's pervasive, means that an attacker is going to be able to hide in that traffic and do the exact same thing to steal data. We have a report that shows all this. And then going back to the MITRE, I was able to take those. This is an eyesore. If you want to actually take time to look through this, we do have a report we put out with all this data called the Spotlight Report for Office 365, and it maps it out. And going into the future, we're going to keep tracking this and seeing like, there were tons of behaviors, but what are the top 10, right? Like what are the things that happen everywhere all the time most commonly? And the ones on the left are the behaviors I showed. Then we mapped it to that framework I showed you, and it has very specific things. And we use this as a recommendation to people like, here's probably some of the things that you need to start looking into immediately, proactively, that these are things you can start to think about. The other way around from an attacker, candidly, is like, hey, these are things that work in networks or in Office. You should probably go try them yourself. It kind of goes both ways. So just to finish up, I want to give some real world examples of the things I've been talking about that we've seen this year in particular. One of them was a mid-sized manufacturer. This one, so I've had several case examples. I have two here for particular reasons. This one was interested me because this was a case where they have multi-factor authentication, and it was in fact bypassed by using an old legacy protocol. And once the attacker knew that they wanted to target this organization, they also knew who they were looking for. And they use things like LinkedIn to figure that out, by the way. So they do reconnaissance with LinkedIn. They know who they're looking for and what they want. They start doing slow brute force sweeps of protocols connected to the organization, looking for legacy protocols that are exposed and they can log into. That's the first thing we saw. It's like, okay, they're looking for a way to get onto it and bypass your MFA. They found it, by the way. They're like, oh, I can get onto SMTP. I already managed to get access to a password. So now I've logged in. Once they logged in, what they did is build forward email rules. So again, they knew they were looking for finance users. They knew what users they want. They just wanted to use that account to get in using an old protocol. And then they built email forwarding rules related to DocuSign and invoices in finance. You can start to make a really good educated guess exactly what they're looking for at that point. They want any kind of information from this finance user on DocuSign and related to invoices. And to be stealthy about it and to try to cover their tracks, they deleted emails related to passwords or security, and they tried to cover it, and they did things like that. So lucky for this organization, we found all this based on the behavior. Let me phrase it, so this organization found those behaviors at this stage. They found the suspicious mail forwarding, they found the deleting of things, they found that somebody logged in. Lucky for them, nothing was stolen yet. And they realized that somebody just took over this account, used it from somewhere else. They're logging in from a remote location that's never been used. And they built all these new rules to send this stuff. The outcome is they were able to delete the mail rules, block the bad access, change the user passwords, and fix everything before anything was stolen. That's good for them. This happened early on in the creation. That's what you want. But what's interesting is this sequence of behaviors, it happened in this order, gives you a time series that this is obviously something dodgy going on. And you can start to look at behaviors and they tell this story, and that's really cool. Versus waiting until something bad happened, you can say, oh, look, this is clearly going in the wrong direction. A second one I bring up, this one was kind of simple, but it's COVID related, so I thought that was important. We have found, I can't talk about all, we have found Russians in American pharmaceuticals, by the way, looking for cure for COVID. It turns out the cure for COVID is the most valuable thing in the world this year for obvious reasons. And it has become a nation state thing. So you have everybody breaking into everybody that has anything to do with the cure for COVID, trying to gain information and an upper hand on this. One of the people in this case study, it was a medical research group, which is a university, by the way. All the medical research groups related to universities, research universities, they're doing a lot of work around the world on this. They're the ones who are really doing the heavy lifting. This was using a suspicious Azure app through a spear phishing technique. And this one even wasn't that fancy. It was a fake calendar optimization app, and it wasn't sent to a regular IT person. It only took one person to install it, and unfortunately, one person did install it. They installed a calendar optimization app for Office 365 onto their device, and it gave full access. And it was a simple non-IT person as it is. And once they were on, they had full access to it. And what's interesting is the next action was using that user to start doing internal phishing, so that rather than, so the one user fell for the fake external one, they should have done that. But then the next stage was now that legitimate user is going to start sending emails from their account to all their contacts in their list, which has a high level of trust, bypasses any spam filter. And if you see it coming from a person and you try to validate it, it's real. So basically real emails from a real user with a malicious connection, trying to propagate more of fake calendar app to other people and do different things. They found that in this stage, before it went to data exfil and stealing things as well, they found the malicious OAuth app. They found that other people did install it as well. By the way, I don't want to shame anybody, but it worked and more people installed, and they realized there's all these fake calendar apps now logging into systems and getting permission to accounts. So ultimately they had to remove all that. So this one was short, but you can see where this goes. Like you get access to every researcher's system, or you get a fake app that has permissions that you're now able to just sit back and collect data in these research organizations that occurs. This is something we went to other research universities and organizations as well, said, hey, you need to go look for this. Like we quite often do that. Like here's an attack that's really happening. It's probably happening to multiple universities at the same time. And I'm going to finish there. I still managed to finish on time, even though we started late, so that's good. Just 3 points I'm going to leave about Office 365, right? The first is, I'm going to repeat it. I truly believe Office 365 is the largest attack vector in any organization today as of 2020. Will that change in 2021? I don't know, maybe, maybe not. But right now, it absolutely is. And a third of all organizations have suffered some form of account takeover on a monthly basis, not over time, but monthly. Account takeover happens to about a third of organizations. That doesn't mean to say data was stolen. It means to say somebody got access to an account and managed to get into an environment. Understanding how those accounts are used and understanding the behaviors and account privilege and things like that in the application is what's key and critical. Like, you really have to understand how the usage patterns. The second is remembering, and this is a universal one and always has been, attacks don't happen in silos. Security vendors and product and technology in places are so quick to always say, well, you need an endpoint protection, you need network protection, you need user protection. Attackers don't think that way at all. They don't really care. They don't think of network or endpoint or user or cloud. They don't think that way at all. They simply think, you have data I want. Where is that data? I'm going to get there however I need to, and I'm going to pivot and hop around and whatever's connected and whatever's available to me. And if I have to change what it is, I will. So if you stop them on one way, it doesn't mean they won't just adapt and change. And they just go to wherever the data is and however they can get it, and they don't care. So we need to just always remember that as well. The last point, Microsoft has a ton of telemetry. Microsoft's a huge partner of ours, by the way. We do a lot of work with them directly. We collaborate with them. We're very involved and they're really good at security. They're also good at telemetry. Anybody who has Windows 10 has actually bothered to look at the kind of telemetry that's coming out. It's a lot. It's amazing how much telemetry they get from every single laptop, every single Office deployment, every single cloud. But that's the problem. They have so much telemetry that it becomes overwhelming. And it turns out there's actually signal in all that noise. It's just, you have to be able to extract that signal, and you have to be very understanding about what you're looking for, which means you have to think about, like, what is the exact thing I'm looking for? I'm looking for somebody who's using email from a foreign location. We have to learn all these things about it. The point being is that it's a problem that's really well suited to machine learning. And if anybody there is in class and they're learning this stuff, it's a really interesting thing that if you want to learn how to write behaviors using machine learning, how to find anomalistic behavior for very specific behaviors using this telemetry, you can. And you have to start collecting these data and start building models around what's normal, how's it normally accessed. You have to build a baseline from that. And then you have to start to find the deviations and changes in what that works like. Doing that method, I believe, is going to be the only way to succeed at identifying when malicious activity does occur, not just in Office, but all SaaS. And really, security is adopting this behavior model anyway. So it's really, I behoove everybody to learn the MITRE ATT&CK framework and how it works and understand what those behaviors are. And with that, that's all I have. And I guess I want to open it up. We're right at 10 o'clock.
Thank you so much for coming in here and talking about all this. I'm very concerned about Office 365. And is there a way we can, I mean, you mentioned that there is something that tells us that people are running queries on Office 365. Is there like an indicator of that that we could tell?
Yeah, so here's the, so obviously, so vector candidly, so one of the things we did is we built our own data science machine learning models that we do that people plug in, and we're pulling the telemetry from the management API of Office 365. That's where all the data is. So all the data exists anyway with the deployment. You would have to collect it. What then happens is you collect that data and you would have to start learning what normal signal is. So to find suspicious or malicious, really like suspicious more, is like, i.e. it shouldn't be occurring. You first have to create a baseline of that telemetry of every time somebody uses Power Automate. So at a simple level, you could actually put that data, dump it into a search engine like an LStack, and just do a search and say, who's using Power Automate? You actually could ask the data quite simply and understand how often Power Automate gets used, for example, or e-discovery, any other thing you want to find, it's in the audit data. You just have to search and look for it. But then the next step is building a detection system to say, okay, so now I know what's normal. I want to find the deviations and changes, right?
So is Power Automate completely separate from what applications use? Is that user only, or do apps use it too?
Oh, sorry. So Power Automate is a tool that's built into Office 365. It even works in Teams. Just like PowerShell is on Windows, you can just pull up a command prompt and run PowerShell on your Windows device now. You can anybody can log into their Office 365 and run Power Automate.
Would that appear on the console as Power Automate? I guess a user using it, or?
Yeah. So you mean how it would look in a log?
Yeah, because I mean, when we have like a teller shouldn't be running Power Automate. That doesn't make sense for them. And that's a pretty obvious indicator that something's going on with that account.
That's correct. So you're right. So now you get into the threat hunting aspect. Yes. The logs will give you a time, date stamp, a user, application. It'll say like Power Automate Teams, 10 a.m. Monday morning, John Doe, right? Like you'll get telemetry around like, oh, this occurred. It's an audit event.
Okay, good deal. Appreciate it.
And I think that's all I have then. So I don't know if you guys have anything else for this meeting.
You have to say this was really good. It was really educational just to kind of hear some of this stuff. I've always known that a lot of this stuff existed, but I guess I never thought about nor seen the harm, I guess, that it could cause or that people could cause if they get in there. Gosh knows, I've been at multiple places where they utilized Office 365 and, to the full max, even the current place where I am, like you were saying, you have a bunch of stuff in OneDrive and they're constantly telling us, put all your stuff in OneDrive, put all your stuff in OneDrive, which is great. And, sure, it's encrypted, but to a degree that's, kind of a back and forth. So.
Yeah, encryption's a funny thing to me. Everybody keeps talking about it. I'm like, encryption isn't security. It only works if you don't have the keys. It's that simple. The minute you have the keys, it doesn't work. It's that simple, right? So it's useful. I'm not telling people not to encrypt. I encrypt everything, but it's all about key management. Key management is the most important part of encryption.
Yeah, some of that's just a compliance checkbox. I'm with you.
Yeah.
Because you can say, well, I encrypted the database. Well, if it's transparent encryption, it doesn't really matter because you still get the data the same way.
Yeah, it's funny, right? It's like, yeah, but you still take requests and access. Or encryption at rest is funny to me. It's like I encrypted my laptop. I'm like, you never turn it off.
Yep. The attack vector of somebody stealing your laptop, that's mitigated. But well, I think to your point is that's not even protected completely because you could just freeze the RAM and pull the keys out of the RAM.
And no one travels with their laptop anymore, so I guess that doesn't even matter. So yeah, if I should have said, if anybody has any more questions or wants to reach out, my email address is simple. It's chris@vector.ai. Like, I guess I've been here long enough. I have Chris. So
yeah, I'll share it with them too, Chris. I'll share it with Nigel so he can share that or whatnot if you want.
Sure. And I think that's all we have then.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll close that with some announcements that we have coming up. Thank you so much, you guys, for coming in and speaking at the event. And also, thank you guys for coming in and hosting a Red Team event. I'm very excited. I have joined the Red Team event, so I'm hoping that everybody on this call, I have sent the email out via Discord. If you'd like it a different way, please let me know. But we are looking for that to be in December. I believe it's the 19th. It's most of the day. Is it the 19th? I have an invite already. But that should be a very fun, entertaining experience. That is essentially all I have. We tested this time to see if it was better for attendance. If you liked this time better, then please don't hesitate to reach out to me. We will do the next meeting at this time as well, and we will see what the attendance looks like. Thank you all for jumping on this ISSA meeting. Loretta, is there anything specific that you were thinking of that we might want to announce?
No, I think you've covered it all. We just hope people will join in on the Red Team event next month. That'll be great. And just like to thank Michael Barker for having his class attend today. So thanks guys for listening. Thank y'all.
So with that said, the Red Team event is not limited to ISSA members. It is novice to intermediate. So if anybody in the class would like to join the Red Team event, it should be fun. But we can send that link out. We'll send it to you, Michael. If you want to send it out to your class, by all means, we'll send it to you and they can register. We have a max of 50. I don't think we're close to that yet, but just keep that in mind.
Yeah, that'd be great. Go ahead and send it to me.
Okay, will do. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thanks a lot.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys.
Bye.